Hello everybody, this is Ben, and in this video what we're going to do is talk about the moral argument for God's existence, yet again. And the reason why is because, well, I just recently did a video on the Kalam cosmological argument for God's existence, and the reason why I did that one is just because every so often I have to review and study again these things, and it's just kind of come around again. And so I figured since the Kalam one went well, I'm going to do this one again. And what I find is every time I go through this, I get a little better at explaining it. And I think back to the past when maybe I didn't explain it as well as I would have liked to. And hopefully I can do a better job this time than I've ever done before, given that I'm going to try to build on what I've done before. But anyway, the moral argument for God's existence. Okay, so for starters, this is actually called the axial argument, but a lot of times people refer to it as the moral argument just because when you say that, people are more likely to know what you're talking about. But the technical philosophical term is the axial argument. So if you go to look up stuff online, you look up moral argument, you're not going to find as much as you'd like to find as far as the history of it. The history of this argument is rather interesting. So if you go back to the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible, which is supposedly written by King Solomon, what this is really a book about ethics in the Bible. And ethics is the philosophical study of morality. And this book actually makes a bunch of different points about ethics. I mean, it examines different ethical systems. It really makes a good argument against what today would be called utilitarianism. But I mean, if this really was written by King Solomon, which is a very, very long time ago, then we've got a book that would be using a different sort of framework. It's so far back that we might not understand sort of the terminology that they prefer to use. But the point at the end of the book is that outside of God, there is no purpose to life. And that's very similar to the moral argument for God's existence. The moral argument for God's existence makes a similar point that without God, there is no such thing as right and wrong. There is no such thing as good and evil. I'm turning on the fan and the air conditioning. I turned them off so I could get a good sound check before I start. The moral argument does not say that you have to believe in God to know right from wrong, but rather that if there is no God, there would be no such thing as right and wrong, which is a very different point. But picking up on this argument, maybe Plato talked about it, after much later. Plato's argument for his Platonic world of forms borrows similar ideas, but this is a good example. This argument's a good example of how philosophical work goes through development. And then, of course, in the 1200s, Thomas Aquinas made this argument. And then during we'll just say the 18th century, during the 1700s, so I didn't just say 18th century, Immanuel Kant, another philosopher, actually puts forth this argument to a degree. But the more interesting work on this argument has been much more modern 20th century work. And what I'm going to do is give you the form that's given by the philosopher William Lane Craig of today. He's a contemporary of today. As of today, he lives. And this is an argument that he defends. And so he formulates the argument in this way. There's actually different syllogisms, different ways that people put it. But this is the way he does it, and I like it, and so I'm going to use it. Premise 1 is objective moral values and duties exist only if God exists. Premise 2, objective moral values and duties exist. Conclusion, therefore God exists. Now what that is the syllogism for the argument. And the syllogism is kind of like the outline for the argument, how the whole thing works. So this is what's called a valid syllogism, and what that means is if premise 1 and premise 2 are true, then the conclusion has to be true. Okay, if it was an invalid syllogism, then there would be some problem in that setup, and the conclusion wouldn't necessarily be guaranteed by the truth of the premises. But in this case, we have a very simple, very valid, it's a valid syllogism. So, if these premises can be demonstrated to be more plausibly true than their negations, then we have a sound argument, and one is rational to believe the conclusion and irrational to reject the conclusion. And you might notice that we're having to get into some, for this video we're going to have to get into some like hairy details of, you know, how we know things to be true, but it's kind of the only way. But anyway, what I'm going to do is give you really good reasons why you should believe the two premises, and then that guarantees the truth of the conclusion if the premises are true, and then we'll try to unpack a little bit that's kind of hidden in the conclusion. So premise 1 is objective moral values and duties exist only if God exists. Now, one of the biggest problems I find with providing this argument for people is that they don't know the terminology, but most people tend to think they do know the terminology, but they actually don't know the terminology. It's not that they pretend to know it. No, they really think they know it, but they don't know it. Okay, so the first word right there is the word objective, and it is a word that has sort of a counterpart that means the opposite thing, which is subjective. Okay, so people tend to not know the difference between subjective and objective. Okay, so subjective just means that it's something like, for example, the best kind of ice cream is a cookie dough blizzard from Dairy Queen. That is a subjective truth. It's true in my mind and my personal experience, but can I demonstrate that that really is true regardless of what anyone thinks? For something to be objectively true, then it would be true even if no one believed it. Like, this Earth orbits the sun is an objective fact. Even if no one in the world thought the Earth orbited the sun, it still orbits the sun. And in fact, in the ancient world, nobody did. Everyone thought that, like in the ancient Greek world, they thought the Earth was the center of the universe and everything orbited the Earth. And they thought that, but it's not subjective. It's not a subjective fact. It's not a subjective truth. It is an objective truth, which means that, in fact, the Earth does orbit the sun regardless of what anyone thinks. So subjective means it's only real in the mind of a person or people, and objective means it's true regardless of what anyone thinks. Now, moral is a key word in here that we have to unpack. What does it mean for something to be moral? Moral has to do with what's called the is-ought distinction by the philosopher, his name's David Hume, actually an atheist philosopher, a Scottish one at that. But he laid out what's called the is-ought distinction. And one of his reasons he laid it out is he said, you cannot demonstrate any kind of morality. You can't get to any kind of morality by looking at the natural world and saying that this is natural, so therefore that's the way things ought to be. Because natural just means normal, and normal is just the way things are, typically. But for something to be a moral statement, it has to be about the way the world should be or the way the world ought to be. And this is the is-ought distinction. So there are is statements and there are ought statements. So for example, it is true that 60 murders happen, roughly 60 murders happen in the south side of Chicago every month. That is true. That is not a moral statement. That is just an is statement. That is what's called a descriptive statement. It just describes the way things are, what is the case. A moral statement is a prescriptive statement that describes the way things should be or the way things ought to be, not necessarily the way they are. So a moral statement would be, it is bad that there are 60 murders on the south side of Chicago every month. roughly. Okay, that is bad. So that. Hopefully, we've got that part. We'll dig more into that as we go. But now we need to think of what is the difference between a moral value and a moral duty, because it says objective moral values and duties. Well, a moral duty means something that you have to do, and if you don't do it, you're bad. Or like you have to pay for the gallon of milk that you take from the store. If you don't pay for the gallon of milk, then you're bad. So you can't take stuff from the store without paying for it. That is a moral duty. A moral value would be something that's good to do, but you don't have to do it. So, like, it's good to, become a school teacher. That is a good thing you can do, but you don't have to do it. You could do other good things. There's a variety of good things you could do. Like, it is good that I'm making these philosophical videos to put on YouTube, but there are other good things that I could do. And if I don't do this, it's not like I necessarily have to do it. It's not like everyone in the world has to do it. It's not like how everybody who takes a gallon of milk from the grocery store has to pay for it, or really should pay for it. Okay? And so those are the terms that people tend to really have a hard time understanding. Objective moral values and duties. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's take a look at why this premise is true. And once we do that, we'll move on to the second premise. Okay? Well, the reason why this premise is true is really boils down to that, really just what's called a basic intuition. In philosophy, intuition doesn't mean like you have psychic powers to see into the other world. It just means something that you are directly connected to, like you have direct knowledge of, I guess, like 1 + 1 = 2. You just have an intuition that 1 + 1 = 2 because you have this direct association with the concepts of what that statement is. Or like, I am holding a water bottle in my hand, and in philosophy, I have a strong intuition that there is a water bottle in my hand because I have this direct association with the water bottle. Okay, so in philosophy, that's what the term means, and so the premise is objective moral values and duties exist only if God exists. And the best proof for that is not really an argument, it's just a basic intuition about what really objective moral values and duties are. Okay, so because if you start thinking really about what are objective moral values and duties, what is morality, you begin to see that it can only exist if God exists. There's no argument for it because some things are just basic. It's like this water bottle that I'm holding in my hand. I don't believe in the existence of the water bottle because I formed a syllogism with premises and then gave evidence for the premises and drew my conclusions. No, I don't. There's no chain of reasoning or anything like that. It's just I just look at the water bottle and I form the belief that there's a water bottle there. There's nothing. It's what's called a basic belief. It's not based on other beliefs. Like, the conclusion God exists in this argument is not a basic belief. It's based on other beliefs. Okay? Basically, the belief that these two premises are true becomes the basis for the conclusion being true. But in the case of like something like the water bottle, that's a basic belief. I don't form an argument to prove the existence of the water bottle. I just form the belief in the basic way. So a basic belief is a belief that's not based on other beliefs. Okay? And in the case of the truth of this first premise, objective moral values and duties exist only if God exists, it's really a very basic intuition. Once you start to ask yourself certain questions like this: what is morality if not a set of desires about the way the world should be? You see, once you understand the nature of that is-ought distinction, or that descriptive prescriptive distinction, or maybe the fact-value distinction, you begin to see that it represents somebody wanting something. And you say, well, maybe it's a desire without someone doing the desiring, and you see that's kind of the problem. There would have to be somebody that wants the world to be in a certain way, or that we just have a want without a wanter, and that doesn't make any sense. So this really is just something you just have to contemplate in your own time, and you begin to see, like, yeah, like, objective moral values and duties exist only if God exists. Okay, now, one argument, one alternative that's put out there is that objective moral values and duties exist. This is the old Platonic view, but they exist without a God to do the desiring. They just kind of float in this other world that defines our world. And I think once we contemplate it, we really begin to see the problem with that. William Lane Craig offers an additional argument. If for someone who doesn't get the basic intuition about this, he offers an additional argument that this view that moral values and duties exist platonically is wrong, because he says, what are the odds that, so for example, if one of the basic moral values out there, the virtue of, like, all people are made in God's image with sacred human rights, what are the odds that animals would evolve to which those morals apply? It seems like a fantastically improbable thing that would happen. So that's kind of his argument. I won't go into much detail about that. But the big counter argument to this is something called the Euthyphro Dilemma. And this was actually offered by Socrates, or is what Plato tells us. And this is a big counter argument, although it's a counter argument that's in the form of a dilemma. And what a dilemma is it's a situation where you have two options, and it seems like whichever option you choose is going to be bad, and so you don't really want to pick either option. I'm drinking from my water bottle. So a dilemma is like if I were to ask you, do you want to be frozen to death or burnt to death? Well, let me think. I don't want to do either of those things, right? So the Euthyphro Dilemma, in the Euthyphro Dilemma, Socrates asked Euthyphro, if I remember correctly, this basic question. And what we'll do is we'll modify it, because he asked it in sort of a Greek context, but we'll modify it for a Christian context, or a monotheistic context, at the very least. Socrates puts it like this. He says, does God command us to love our neighbor, for example, because it's good? Or is it good because God commands it? So it seems like whichever way you go, you've got a problem. Because if it's good because God commands it, then you've got a couple problems arise. You say, well, then God's not really good himself, because God just makes up what's good and what's not good. You can't really say God's good. So, and also, why did God pick love your neighbor? Why didn't God make eat your neighbor the moral value, the moral duty? You have to eat your neighbor instead of love your neighbor. It seems like God's arbitrary in his selection of this. And then if God just picks something like that without a reason why, we're free to reject God's belief, because God doesn't really know he doesn't know it's better. He just randomly picked it arbitrarily for no reason at all. It's just like if someone tells you, like a conspiracy theorist once told me that he thought Kobe Bryant was assassinated, or even worse, he told me he thought that, like, Hillary Clinton and Obama were really World War III and, like, the Antichrist, and they were trying to bring in the Antichrist. And I said, that's a conspiracy theory. Where's your evidence? and he didn't have any evidence. He just laid out his theory in a slightly greater detail. So if he doesn't have any reason why he believes that, then he believes it arbitrarily, and I'm free to reject it and not believe it, because he has no force against someone who just doesn't want to believe it. You want to believe it, I don't want to believe it. Good for you. And he might say, well, you can't change my mind. Well, that's fine. You continue being as dumb as possible, and that's something that I wish you wouldn't do, but that's mostly creating problems for you. As Obi-Wan said, who's more foolish, the fool or the fool who follows him? So it creates problems for other people that believe you. But maybe a better way to illustrate the problem is for me to create an alternative conspiracy theory, where maybe I'll say that Donald Trump and the Republicans are working for the Antichrist, and they're bringing in the end of the world. And he might ask me, well, do you have any reason why you believe that? And I could say, no, just like you, for Hillary and Obama, don't have any reason. I, for Donald Trump and the Republicans, I believe this for no reason at all. And all of a sudden, with the shoes on the other foot, he wants evidence. He's not going to change his mind. I have to have right. So if God comes up with our moral laws, like love your neighbor, arbitrarily, we're free to reject them and come up with other moral laws, and he's got no force against us. So this is a serious problem. But on the other hand, if God commands it because it's right, then and he's not just making it arbitrarily, but rather he commands us the right moral laws because they're the right ones, then we have some sort of some sort of moral laws that judge what God does as good or bad. And then whatever that thing is, that thing becomes God's God, the God of God. And so that is the Euthyphro Dilemma. And it is directly an argument and objection to this premise. The premise is that objective moral values and duties exist only if God exists. Now, the thing about a dilemma is if there is a third option that you can take, then it's not a dilemma. You've got a third option. So so for example, if I were to ask you, do you want to be, eaten for supper, or do you want to eat somebody else for supper? You might say, well, I don't want to be eaten for supper. That seems bad. But at the same time, I don't want to become a cannibal. And then, you might say, how about instead let's go get a burrito? If you have that third option, then the dilemma falls away. So in logic, a faulty dilemma is when someone tries to limit the options and trick you into thinking that there's only two options, so you have to pick, one of the two, when in reality you can take a third option. So a classic example is how a lot of people who are communists like to ask, are you a fascist or are you a communist? They interpret the whole world as either fascism or communism, and fascism's bad, so be a communist. But they have a tendency to see things that way and interpret things that way, but in reality, there's lots and lots and lots of different views you could have. Or in the 1800s, in American Protestant Christianity, you were either a modernist or a fundamentalist. And a modernist believes that evolution is true and we evolved from apes, and the Bible is not in the inerrant word of God, and but also the modernists believe that slavery should be abolished, and later the modernists believe that segregation should be abolished. Now, if you were a fundamentalist, you believe that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, the earth is 6,000 years old, and we did not evolve from apes. We're especially created by God, Adam and Eve, 6,000 years ago. And slavery is the will of God, and you should maintain slavery. And then later, after slavery is abolished, because there was a big war in America, the fundamentalists shifted over to segregation. You should keep segregation going. Segregation good. So I think a lot of people quickly recognize that, I don't want to be forced into either of those camps. It seems like I've been given a dilemma, and no matter what I pick, I don't like either of those. So maybe I want something else entirely. And this is the neo-orthodox position actually arose in the modernist camp, but then a lot of people in the fundamentalist camp embraced it. People like C.S. Lewis, who said, hey, the early church didn't weigh in on whether or not the earth was 6,000 years old or anything. There's so many creeds of the Christian faith, historic creeds, that you can believe without taking a stance on any of this stuff. So a lot of people probably would describe themselves in something similar to neo-orthodox today. But that's just an example of how a dilemma can be false. Now the Euthyphro Dilemma is false because essentially what it's doing is it's saying that the morals are sort of beneath God and arbitrarily made up by God, or they're above God and judge God. But what you can do is you can move it in a different direction and say the basis for the moral law is God's own nature. And that gets into like metaphysical terminology, and then there's all kinds of metaphysical debates about exactly what that means and all kinds of cool theological debates. But we don't need to get into those for the sake of this video. We can just say God is goodness, and that'll work for the purposes of our video today. But there's all kinds of really cool debates in theology back and forth about, because there's a whole world inside that third option of all sorts